Shadow started growling before Luke Mercer even opened his eyes. The cabin was dark, the kind of 3 a.m. Dark that swallowed sound, yet the German Shepherd stood rigid at the door, hackles up claws, raking deep grooves into the wood. Outside, the wind keened across the frozen ridge, carrying a faint metallic cry Luke almost convinced himself he'd imagined. The radio on the counter still glowed with the last weather report, temperatures plummeting whiteout before dawn. "Easy, boy," Luke whispered, heart thudding. "There's nothing out there." Shadow whined, staring into the trees, trembling with urgency. And then Luke heard the second cry. The second cry was sharper thin, human swallowed quickly by the wind. Luke shot upright. Shadow was already pawing at the latch, his whole body vibrating with the frantic energy of an animal who knew. Not fear, not confusion, purpose. Luke grabbed his coat pulse spiking. "Nobody's out in this cold," he muttered, though the words felt hollow even as he said them. The storm warning had been clear. Anyone caught beyond the tree line tonight wouldn't last an hour. Shadow barked once, low urgent, and pressed his nose to the narrow gap under the door, whining as if every second mattered. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Luke killed the lantern, letting the moonlit snow outside silhouette the dog's tense frame. The wind carried another sound, a dull, rhythmic thud from somewhere in the timbered ravine. Not an animal, too deliberate. Shadow looked back at him, eyes bright, pleading. Luke's breath fogged in the frigid air. Whatever was happening out there in the dark, Shadow wanted him to see it, and the storm clock was running fast. He pulled on his boots. "All right, partner," he whispered. "Show me." The cold hit Luke Mercer the moment he stepped outside. A hard slap of air, so sharp it felt carved from glass. The world beyond his cabin existed in gradients of blue and silver moonlight, catching the frozen crust of snow stars, flickering through ragged slices of cloud. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but the sky carried the electric tension of a fist about to clench. Shadow bounded ahead a few paces, then stopped twisting back to check Luke's progress. His breath plumed like steam from a locomotive ears swiveling with laser focus. The dog wasn't wandering or merely reacting. He was tracking. Luke tightened the straps on his gloves, every muscle slowed awake. He hadn't slept much, not since last winter, not since the night he'd failed to stop a different cry in a different darkness. The memory lived under his ribs, a place where regret never truly thawed. "Tell me there's a reason for this," he murmured. Shadow didn't answer, just nudged Luke's thigh, then faced the tree line again. That small, deliberate gesture tugged at Luke in a way he didn't want to examine too closely. The dog had been with him for only 8 months, yet somehow knew every contour of Luke's moods, every hesitation, every flash of grief he tried to hide. The shepherd had arrived at the shelter with no history, only a scarred muzzle and a wary silence. Luke had recognized the look in his eyes instantly. A soldier knew another survivor regardless of species. He'd taken Shadow home the same day. The cabin sat on the eastern face of Deadfall Ridge, about 30 minutes from a dirt road that barely qualified as one. Luke had chosen it for its solitude, no neighbors, no traffic, no obligations, just 4 walls, a roof, a wood stove, and a radio tower that reached the nearest ranger station on good days. It wasn't much, but it kept the world at a respectful distance. He liked it that way. The Marines had taught him disciplined vigilance, how to read terrain like a second language. What they hadn't taught him was how to sleep when the world grew quiet. Some scars weren't on skin. They were in the moments between breaths, the split-second flashes of memory when a shadow looked too familiar or when a voice in the wind carried the wrong cadence. Shadow had changed that just a little. The dog's steady breathing by the fireplace, the gentle thump of his tail against the floor, even a hardened mind could find comfort in that. Tonight, though, the shepherd was in a state Luke had never seen, and it unnerved him. They crossed from the clearing into the forest, the snow-swallowing sound in a soft, eerie hush. The pines rose like ancient pillars, their branches heavy with ice, their shadows long and angled in the moonlight. Luke's boots crunched with each step. Shadow's steps were nearly silent paws gliding over the snow's surface with uncanny precision. Luke scanned the darkness instincts, sharpening with each breath. "Any chance this is just a moose with a cold," he whispered. Shadow huffed once an almost offended sound. "Yeah, didn't think so." As they moved deeper into the timber, the cold ceded a little to motion warmth blooming through Luke's limbs. He adjusted the rifle on his shoulder, fingers brushing the stock with a muscle memory, older than the cabin, older even than the scars he tried not to think about. He wasn't expecting danger, but neither was he naive enough to rule it out. The Montana wilderness didn't play by human rules. Shadow suddenly halted. His body lowered, tail-stiff ears pinned forward. Luke mirrored the stance automatically, dropping into a slight crouch, listening. There. A sound. Faint, irregular, like something knocking rhythmically against wood. Then muffled movement. Not footsteps, more like dragging. Luke's stomach tightened. Shadow glanced back, eyes bright with urgency. "Go on," Luke whispered. Shadow obeyed instantly, weaving between tree trunks with deliberate purpose. Luke followed, weaving through narrow spaces, sliding down short embankments, vaulting fallen logs. The dog's pace was steady, controlled, leading him not fleeing. After 8 minutes of rough terrain, the trees thinned. The forest opened around a wide gully carved by a seasonal creek, now frozen in jagged white ribbons. The moonlight reflected off the ice, turning the ravine into a fractured mirror. Shadow stopped again, tail slicing the air, nose pointed toward a darker shape pressed against the far side of the ravine. A shed. Abandoned by the look of it, Luke exhaled slowly. "Shadow, what did you find?" The dog growled, not a warning growl, but a frustrated one, as if trying to force Luke to see the thing he couldn't yet. Luke descended the gully, carefully planting each step. Shadow leapt down easily and trotted across the frozen ditch without hesitation. The moment Luke reached the other side, a gust of wind knifed through the clearing, bringing with it a scent that made the hair on Luke's neck stand up. Smoke. But not from pine wood. From kerosene. And underneath it, something metallic. Blood. Luke's breath clouded in the air. Not good. Shadow whined, pawing at the shed's warped wooden door. Luke tested the handle. Frozen solid. He could break it, but that would echo through the ravine like a signal flare. And if someone was inside, scared or hurt, startling them could make things worse. "Okay," Luke breathed. "We'll go slow." He knelt, placing his ear against the wood. A faint sound leaked through a pained cough barely there. Shadow pressed his forehead against the door as if willing it to open. "Someone's in there," Luke whispered. "But why the hell are they locked in a shed?" He stepped back, assessing the structure. The door was iced over. No windows. The roof sagged beneath heavy snow, creaking with each gust of wind. The whole place looked like it was one storm away from collapsing. Luke braced his hands on his knees, thinking fast. The storm would hit within the hour. Temperature was already dropping. Whoever was inside might not survive long enough for help to arrive. Shadow pawed the door again, claws scraping wood. Luke rested a hand on the dog's shoulder. "I know, bud. I know." The dog's muscles quivered beneath his palm. He wasn't just concerned. He was pleading. Luke felt something twist deep inside him, something he thought had hardened years ago. "All right," he murmured. "We're doing this." He took a step back, planted his feet, and lowered his shoulder. The door groaned. Not enough. He tried again, harder this time. The hinges screamed. Shadow barked. Encouraging. Once more, Luke muttered. He hit the door with everything he had. It burst inward, a cloud of frost and dust blooming into the air. The smell hit him immediately, stale kerosene, damp wood, and something sourer beneath it. Shadow darted inside the beam of Luke's headlamp, chasing after him. The shed's interior was small, too small for the two figures it contained. One hunched shape in the corner, another collapsed on the floor. Luke's heart slammed against his ribs. The person on the floor, a man, was unconscious, pale, a rope around his wrists, the knots crude but tight. His breaths were shallow, each one rasping. Shadow nudged the man's cheek, whining. The other figure, a much smaller one, sat trembling in the corner. A child, maybe 12. Eyes wide with terror but fixed on Shadow as though the dog were the only safe thing in the room. Luke lifted his hands slowly. "It's all right," he said softly. "We're here to help." The boy swallowed voice, barely a whisper. Are you with him?" With who, Luke asked. The child pointed toward the unconscious man. "No, not him," the boy whispered. "The other man, the one who locked us in." Luke's pulse kicked. "Where is he now?" The boy shook his head. "He left, but he said he'd come back before the storm." A gust of wind rattled the shed walls. Shadow growled at the doorway. Luke's instincts screamed a single truth. Whoever did this wasn't far, and he was coming back soon. The boy's eyes stayed glued to the doorway, as if expecting the shadows outside to solidify into a man at any second. Luke moved slowly, keeping his voice steady, not loud, not soft, just controlled. "Hey," he said, crouching to meet the boy's gaze. "My name's Luke. This is Shadow. We're not here to hurt you." We heard someone calling out. The boy bit his lower lip hard enough to leave a white indentation. "That was me," he whispered. "I was trying to wake him up. He wouldn't wake up anymore." Luke's flashlight beam swept over the unconscious man. Late 40s. Deep bruising around the jaw. Fingertips blue from cold exposure. A rope dug into his wrists, swollen and chafed. Luke reached out and felt for a pulse, slow but present. "He's alive," Luke murmured. The boy sagged with relief, his breath fogging the icy air. Shadow circled once, then pressed his body against the boy's side, leaning into him like a living shield. The boy's trembling slowed just a little under the dog's weight. Luke cut the rope binding the man's wrists. "What's your name, Evan?" "All right, Evan. I need you to tell me what happened." "Who locked you here?" Evan's fingers twisted into Shadow's fur like it was the only stable thing in the room. "It was Mr. Carver." Luke didn't recognize the name. He brought us up here a few days ago. Said Dad owed him money and he wanted to talk alone." Evan's voice shook. He got angry. Really angry. Then he hit Dad. And he said I should stay quiet if I wanted my dad to live. Luke's jaw tightened. "Where is this Carver now?" Evan's eyes shifted to the gap of moonlight spilling through the broken doorway. "He said he'd come back after dark with gas. Said he didn't need the shed after we learned our lesson." Luke felt the temperature in the shed plummet not because of the weather, because of the implication. Shadow sensed it too, letting out a low, murderous growl. Luke steadied his breathing. "Evan, your dad needs medical care now. And Carver, he's a threat. We need to move." The boy's fear cracked open into full panic. "No, we can't. He knows these woods. He'll come back. He always comes back." Luke crouched, placing both gloved hands gently on Evan's shoulders. "Listen to me. I need you to focus. We're getting you and your dad out of here alive. But I can't do that if we stay trapped in this shed." Evan swallowed hard, nodding once. "Okay. Good. Shadow's with us. We're not alone." Shadow barked softly, his tail thumping once on the frozen floor. Luke did a quick assessment. The unconscious man, Evan's father, was deadweight in the icy conditions. Carrying him would be hard, slow, dangerous. But leaving him behind until later, not an option. The storm was rolling in fast. Snowflakes were already drifting sideways, thin at first, building toward whiteout. He leaned close to Shadow. "Watch the door." Shadow moved instantly, planting himself between the shed and the darkness. Then Luke wrapped the man's arms over his shoulders, bracing under the weight. "We're heading to my cabin," he told Evan. "It's a hike, but we can make it." Evan hesitated. "Carver'll see tracks." "I'm counting on that," Luke muttered. "He'll follow the wrong set." "What do you mean?" Luke didn't answer right away. His mind was already working through terrain, wind direction, cover routes. He shifted his stance, hoisting the unconscious man higher. "We split up just for a few minutes. Shadow goes with you. He'll keep you safe." The boy's eyes widened. "And you? I'll leave a false trail for Carver. He'll follow me. He'll think I've got your dad." "That's dangerous," Evan whispered. "It's necessary." Shadow whined softly, nudging Luke's hip as if arguing. Luke touched his head. "I know, buddy. But he needs you more right now." Shadow looked between Luke and the boy, then finally stepped to Evan's side, pressing his flank firmly into the child's leg. A silent promise. Luke pointed toward a thin stretch of trees. "Evan, head east for 200 yards. There's a ravine with enough tree cover to hide your tracks. Shadow will guide you. From there, you'll climb a small ridge. My cabin is just past it. You'll know it when you see the woodpile and the antenna." Evan clenched his jaw. "Will you be right behind us?" Luke shifted his grip on Evan's father. "I'll be close. It wasn't a lie, just not the full truth." They stepped out into the night. The storm's edge had arrived, a thick curtain of blowing snow swallowing the treetops. The temperature plunged the kind of cold that made even breathing feel heavy. Shadow moved first, nudging Evan gently forward. The boy stuck close to him, glancing back every few steps. Luke knelt in the snow, lowering Evan's father briefly. He scanned the tree line, then he saw it. A flicker of orange, a lighter, someone testing a flame against the wind. Someone not far enough away. Luke tensed. Carver was already on his way back. He leaned down close to Evan's father again, lifting him with a grunt. Then he angled west, opposite the direction Evan and Shadow had gone, dragging his boots heavily to leave deep, obvious tracks. He whispered into the dark, "Come find me instead." The woods swallowed him quickly. Snow pelted his face, ice forming along the edge of his hood. The weight on his back slowed him to a crawl, but he forced himself forward, carving a visible trail. Every instinct in Luke's body screamed caution, but he ignored it. He needed Carver to follow him, needed to give Evan and Shadow enough time to disappear into the ridge. The wilderness had a strange way of amplifying silence. Every tree creak became a gunshot. Every shifting shadow felt like breath on his neck. Then a voice. Rough. Familiar only by tone. He was out there, Carver. Closer than Luke wanted him to be. Luke didn't answer. Just pressed on heart, hammering. Behind him, twigs snapped. Heavy footsteps crashed through the brush. Luke exhaled. Good. Let him come. The wind howled through the pines, blowing snow sideways, swallowing everything else. Luke could barely see 20 feet ahead now. The storm was accelerating. Then Carver shouted again, this time angrier teeth in every word, "You think you can steal what's mine." The fury in his voice carried easily through the trees. Luke didn't slow. He reached the clearing edge, the start of a steep descent toward a narrow canyon. Good visibility here. Good acoustics. Perfect place to control a confrontation. He lowered the unconscious man to the snow, tucking him behind a fallen trunk. Then he rose, rifle in hand. 1 breath. 2. Carver burst through the tree-lined face, twisted eyes wild. He froze when he saw Luke. "You," Carver spat. "Drop the rifle." Luke didn't. "You're not touching that boy again," Luke said calmly. Carver's face contorted. "You don't know a damn thing about any of this." Luke's finger settled lightly near the trigger, not flexing, not threatening. "Just ready." "I know enough," he replied, "and I'm not letting you take another step." Carver laughed, a jagged, broken sound swallowed partly by wind. "You think you can stop me? Storm's coming. Roads are dead. No one's finding you." Luke held his ground. Shadow's absence was a physical ache beside him, but also a reminder he was protecting the right people. Carver took a single step forward. Luke spoke quietly, almost softly, "Turn around." Carver lifted a hand instead, and the glint of metal flashed under the moonlight. A gun. Luke's stomach dropped. He had seconds, maybe less, but behind him, somewhere in that white chaos, a boy and a dog were running for their lives. He couldn't fail them. He braced. Carver raised the gun, and the storm collapsed over them like a closing fist. Whiteout. Total blindness. Luke exhaled once steady and deliberate. The inciting incident was no longer a mystery. This was a fight for survival. For all of them. White swallowed the world. One moment, Luke stood facing Carver, gun-raised eyes wild, and the next, the storm collapsed around them in a blinding curtain of snow, so dense it erased distance, shape, direction. The wind shrieked through the trees, drowning Luke's breath, ripping his hood sideways. The world narrowed to sound and instinct. "Carver," he shouted. Only the storm answered. Luke didn't wait. He dropped low, letting muscle memory lead. Sudden whiteouts had been common overseas sandstorms instead of snowstorms, but the principle was the same. Get stable, drop your silhouette, trust terrain, not vision. He backed toward the fallen log where he'd hidden Evan's father. The snow stung his cheeks, each flake a needle of ice. He pressed a glove against the man's neck, pulse steady, still breathing. "Hang in there," he murmured. "We're not done." A voice cracked through the storm, warped by wind, Carver's but distant, disoriented. "You can't hide from me." Luke didn't answer. Silence was his advantage now. He slung the unconscious man over his shoulder again, grunting with the effort. Every bone in his body protested this was deadweight in brutal weather. But there was no stopping. Every second Evan and Shadow gained mattered. The ridge. That had to be his target. If he could get the man close enough to the slope, he could use the terrain to mask their trail, maybe regroup with the boy. A sharp gunshot split the storm. Luke dropped instantly behind the log snow erupting around him. The bullet whistled somewhere overhead. Carver was firing blind. That was the only reason Luke was still breathing. Luke steadied his breath. He didn't want to return fire. He wasn't trying to kill Carver, but he could use sound to misdirect him. Luke aimed west a full 90 degrees off his real direction. He fired once. The sound cracked through the night, ricocheting in the narrow canyon. Carver's voice followed immediately. "I hear you, good." Luke didn't waste time. He dragged Evan's father in the opposite direction, each step sinking deep into the snow. His thighs burned. His lungs ached. The man's weight felt doubled by the storm's fury. The whiteout shredded visibility down to 2 feet. Even the shapes of nearby trees dissolved into shadowy smears. Luke forced himself to keep moving slow, deliberate, constant motion. Stopping meant freezing. Stopping meant dying. A flash of memory hit him unbidden. Not snow. Sand. A blinding desert storm, the roar of wind thick with grit, his squad scattered as visibility collapsed. He remembered the frantic search for a missing corporal. He remembered finding him too late. Luke clenched his teeth. Not again. Not tonight. The storm thrashed around him, but he angled himself toward the ridge, counting steps, feeling the slope shift beneath him. The terrain tilted upward, a good sign. He pushed harder. Then a shape materialized in the blizzard. At first it was only a blur, a darker smear against the blinding white. Luke froze hard, hammering, tightening his grip on the rifle. But the shape rushed forward with silent grace, closing the distance. Shadow. The shepherd burst into view, snow caked along his thick coat, amber eyes blazing with urgency. He barked one sharp, commanding sound, then darted behind Luke, circling the unconscious man, checking him. "Shadow, where's Evan?" Luke shouted over the wind. Shadow turned and sprinted a few feet uphill, then back again, barking insistently. Good. The boy was safe. Shadow wouldn't leave him otherwise. Luke forced his legs to move again. "All right, partner, show me the way." The dog took the lead, keeping just within visibility range, pausing every few yards to make sure Luke was behind him. Together they climbed the ridge. By the time they reached the crest, Luke's breath was ragged. He lowered Evan's father gently beside a wind-battered boulder, shielding him from the worst of the gale. Shadow pressed close, whining softly, fear and urgency tangled together. Luke crouched to catch his breath, blinking snow from his lashes. "Is Evan up here?" Shadow barked once, then trotted toward a narrow path, carved naturally into the ridge. Luke followed, dragging the man as gently as he could. His arms burned. His shoulders screamed with the strain. But giving up wasn't an option. The path curved sharply, and suddenly the wind eased. The ridge walls blocked the storm just enough to reveal a small pocket of relative calm, a hollow sheltered between two slabs of rock. And there, huddled inside, hugging his knees, was Evan. When the boy saw Luke, he scrambled to his feet. "Is Dad, he's alive?" Luke said. "But we need shelter. Now." Shadow nudged the man's boot gently, then looked pointedly toward the slope leading down the other side of the ridge. Luke followed the dog's gaze. Through the thinning veil of snow, his cabin's antenna glinted faintly in the moonlight. They'd made it. But the storm was getting worse, and Carver was still out there. "Evan," Luke said, voice steady, despite the fear scraping at his throat. "Stay beside me. Shadow stays between us. We move fast." The boy nodded. Shadow positioned himself exactly as Luke had ordered Guardian Guide Anchor. They began the final descent. Behind them, muffled and faint, but unmistakable, came a voice swallowed by the snow. "You can't run forever." Carver was close. Too close. Luke pressed his hand against Evan's back. "Go. Now." They moved. The slope was treacherous. Snow-packed, hard slick beneath their boots. Luke carried Evan's father like precious cargo, shifting weight to maintain balance. Shadow zigzagged ahead, finding paths that wouldn't break Luke's footing. They were halfway down when the storm faltered briefly, just long enough for a single gunshot to cut through the air like lightning. The bullet struck the snow inches from Luke's boot. Evan screamed. Luke didn't think he reacted. Down. He tackled Evan, shielding him with his body as the boy hit the snow. Shadow spun fur-bristling teeth, bared, placing himself directly between them and the ridge above. Carver appeared through the storm like a nightmare silhouetted on the ridge, crest gun raised breath pluming in furious bursts. "There you are," he snarled. Luke rolled, dragging Evan out of the direct line of fire, his other arm anchoring Evan's father behind the nearest rock outcrop. Shadow stood rigid, growling, a low, deadly rumble vibrating through his entire frame. Carver took one step forward on the ridge. "You think you can steal what's mine?" Luke rose partially from cover. "What you're doing is attempted murder, Carver. Put the gun down." Carver laughed, harsh, unhinged. "You don't get it. You're all already dead. Storm's gonna hide everything. Storm's gonna bury you." Another shot blasted into the snow closer this time. Luke inhaled slow and steady despite the adrenaline pounding in his veins. He had 3 lives to protect, and no clear shot of his own. Shadow barked, once sharp, decisive, and looked at Luke. A silent message. A plan. Luke understood it instantly, and his answer, spoken through a storm that echoed like a battlefield, was simple. Do it. Shadow launched into the blizzard. Shadow hit the snow like a streak of living muscle fur and fury consumed by the white haze. Carver jerked backward in surprise, gun wavering as the dog closed the distance in long, powerful bounds. "Damn mutt!" Carver barked, firing blindly. The bullet whistled past Shadow's flank, close enough to kick a puff of snow into the air. The shepherd didn't flinch. He swerved sharply, using the storm as cover, disappearing completely 1 second and reappearing 10 feet closer the next. A ghost with teeth. Luke didn't waste the distraction. "Evan, stay down," he shouted, dragging the boy deeper behind the rock outcrop. I can help," Evan sputtered. "No, your dad needs you steady." Luke positioned the unconscious man between them, creating a barrier against stray shots. "Hands on him. Keep him warm. Don't move unless I tell you." The boy obeyed, trembling but focused, one hand pressed firmly against his father's chest, the other clutching Shadow's discarded paw prints like anchors. Luke raised his rifle not to fire but to ready. He still didn't have a clean shot. He wouldn't risk hitting Shadow. Carver regained his footing on the ridge, stumbling backward as Shadow lunged for his gun arm. The man twisted violently, slipping on the ice, the gun tumbling from his grip, skittering down the slope. Shadow leapt. Carver swung a knee into the dog's ribs, sending the shepherd sliding sideways through the snow. Shadow landed hard, rolling, then launched again, unyielding. "You should have stayed dead," Carver snarled, whipping a broken tree branch from the ground like a club. Luke's breath caught. "Shadow," he shouted. But the storm swallowed his voice. The shepherd lunged again, this time lower teeth, aiming for Carver's wrist. The man swung the branch downward. A sickening thud cracked through the blizzard. Shadow yelped. Luke moved before his body even registered the motion. He sprinted uphill, slipping, climbing, clutching the rifle with numbed fingers. "Get away from him," he roared. Carver spun toward him, breath ragged. Shadow lay half buried in snow, stunned but conscious, pushing himself back to his paws with stubborn resolve. Carver's face twisted into a sneer. "You want the mutt, come take him." His hand dove to his belt. Knife, long serrated. Luke stopped cold, the memory slamming into him like a physical blow. A different blade, a different storm. A corporal bleeding out on a dune while Luke screamed for a medic who never came. Not tonight. Not again. The fear hardened into something sharper. Luke raised the rifle. "Carver," he said quietly, "don't." Carver lunged. Luke squeezed the trigger. Click. A misfire. The cold had frozen the firing pin. Carver's grin widened. "Just my damn luck." He charged. Luke barely had time to throw the rifle aside before the man slammed into him, sending them both crashing into the snow. The impact drove the air from Luke's lungs. The knife flashed above him, a streak of metal arcing downward. Luke caught Carver's wrist, mid-swing muscles burning. "Think, Carver, you're making this worse for yourself. You're not walking out of this." Carver spat, twisting the blade closer. Snowflakes collected on Luke's eyelashes. His arms trembled under Carver's weight. The knife tip hovered inches from his chest, edging closer, closer. Then a blur of gray and white slammed into Carver's side. Shadow. The dog hit the man with everything he had left, his teeth sinking into Carver's heavy jacket, dragging him away. Carver cursed, scrambling, slipping, kicking at the shepherd viciously. Luke crawled to his feet, grabbing the fallen rifle, not as a gun but as a staff. He swung the stock hard, catching Carver across the forearm. The knife flew from the man's grip, disappearing into the storm. Carver stumbled back, clutching his arm. "You don't know who you're messing with." Luke planted himself between Carver and Shadow, rifle raised again, not to shoot but to defend. "I know enough," Luke said. "You tied up a kid and his father. You left them to freeze. And you came back to finish the job." Carver's eyes glittered wild and cornered. "That land is mine. They stole it from me. Nobody steals from me. Evan's father didn't steal anything." Carver's jaw rippled with rage. "You think you know the story. You think you know what's down there," Luke blinked. Down where Carver's lips twisted into a cold, feral smile. "You'll never make it to your cabin." He backed away slowly, step by step, then vanished into the whiteout behind a curtain of blowing pine boughs on purpose. Not fleeing, regrouping. Luke cursed under his breath. Shadow staggered toward him, leaning heavily against Luke's leg. The dog's breathing was labored but steady, his flank bruised snow clinging to his fur. Luke knelt, cupping the shepherd's face. "Hey, you're okay. You hear me. You stay with me." Shadow licked his glove, once tired but resolute. Evan's faint voice carried through the storm. "Mr. Luke, are you okay?" Luke scooped Shadow's weight partly over his arms and half-guided, half-dragged him back down the slope. Evan clung to his father's body, eyes wide, tears frozen on his cheeks. "You came back. I thought I said I'd be close," Luke replied, breath ragged. "We need to move. Now." Evan looked at Shadow. "Is he hurt? He'll be all right. But Carver's not done yet." Lightning flickered unusually across the sky, silent, sheet-like warning of the storm's escalation. The wind carried a low, distant groan. Trees bowing, snow heaving. Luke's instincts prickled. Something was shifting beneath the surface of the storm, literally. He grabbed Evan's shoulder. "Get behind me. Hold your dad's coat. Don't let go." The boy obeyed instantly. Luke hoisted the unconscious man again. The weight felt impossible. Every step screamed, but quitting was a luxury he didn't have. Shadow limped ahead, nose low, pushing forward. They were within 50 yards of the cabin. Luke could see the faint outline of the antenna, the roofline half swallowed by white. Almost there. Almost a thunderous crack slammed through the ridge like the world had split open. Evan screamed. What was that? Luke spun just as the snow under Shadow's paws dipped, then collapsed. A sinkhole. Wide. Sudden. Hidden by drifting snow. Shadow fell first, sliding out of sight. Luke reached for him, Shadow, but the ground gave way beneath all of them. The world plunged downward. Cold. Dark. Silence. Then impact. Luke hit hard snow exploding around him. Pain flared down his spine. He tried to breathe, but the air felt too thick. He wasn't on open ground anymore. He was underground. Evan whimpered somewhere to his right. "Dad, Dad, Dad won't wake up." Shadow barked weakly in the dark ahead. Luke forced himself upright, ignoring the pain sharpening behind his ribs. The ceiling above them was jagged ice and dirt. A collapsed mine shaft. Carver's last words hit him like a punch. "You think you know what's down there," Luke froze. They weren't alone. A pair of footsteps crunched behind him in the darkness of the broken tunnel. Carver's voice, closer than ever, echoed off the stone. "Welcome to the part of the mountain no map shows." Luke turned slowly. Carver was already blocking the only way out. And he wasn't alone. A second shadow moved behind him. Someone bigger. Someone silent. Luke exhaled a single word. "Not good." For a moment, no one moved. Snow dust drifted lazily from the jagged hole above, glittering in the beam of Luke's headlamp. The rest of the world was rock and dark and breath, his Evans the ragged rasp of the unconscious man, and two strangers standing between them and the only way out. Carver's silhouette filled most of the tunnel. The man beside him was broader shoulders, nearly brushing both walls. His coat was stained with something darker than mud, his face a slab of weathered stone under the brim of a hard hat with a dead headlamp. Shadow stepped forward, placing himself between Luke and the men, hackles raised. Carver's smile was thin and humorless. "Didn't expect my shortcut to help you too," he drawled. "I should charge you rent." Luke's voice came out steady, quieter than he felt. "You led us over a sinkhole." "Led you near it," Carver corrected. "Storm did the rest. The mountain takes who it wants." The bigger man finally spoke. His voice was low gravelly, carrying an old exhaustion. "Tunnel's not safe, Carver. Ceiling's shearing. We should get out." Carver shot him a glare. "We go when I have what I came for, not before." He jerked his chin toward Evan's father. "Get him on his feet." Luke didn't move. "He's hypothermic, concussed." Dragging him deeper into an old mine isn't just stupid, it's manslaughter. Carver shrugged. "Only if someone lives to tell it that way." Shadow growled, stepping closer, lips peeled back just enough to make his point. Carver shifted his gaze to the dog. "Call him off." Luke kept his tone even. Shadow only bites when someone deserves it. The big man grunted, almost a ghost of a smile. "Dogs got good instincts." Carver flicked him an irritated look. "Holt, you want your share or not?" Holt's jaw worked. He glanced at Luke, then at Evan, small, shaking hand clamped on his father's jacket, and something in his expression softened just a fraction. "What's your share in this?" Luke asked quietly. Carver answered for him, words clipped. "He used to work this mine, before the state decided it was cheaper to pretend it didn't exist." Holt's eyes went flat. They shut it down after the collapse. "After the gas." Evan's breath hitched. "There's gas down here, not like that," Holt said. "If we're quick." The overhead rock creaked, as if the mountain were listening. Luke's instincts screamed at him to get his people out now. But Carver's stance, the way he filled that narrow stretch of tunnel, the shadows moving under his coat, Luke would bet money the man had another weapon tucked somewhere. They were boxed in. "Here's what happens," Carver said. "We all walk together. You carry him," he jabbed a finger at Evan's father. "Holt leads us to the vault, we get what's mine, and then you all disappear back to your little cabin. You act smart, nobody else gets hurt." Luke's mind snagged on a word. Vault. Carver smirked. "Funny thing about old mines, people think the gold's what's worth hiding." He jerked his thumb at the dark behind him. "But this one's sitting on something better." Holt's jaw tightened. "This isn't what we agreed. You wanted your cut," Carver snapped. "You're getting it. You keep the tunnel from killing us. I keep the law from finding this place. Everybody wins." Luke glanced at Evan. The boy's eyes were wide, following every word, every gesture. "What's in the vault?" Luke asked. Carver's gaze sharpened calculation, flickering across his features. "Don't matter to you. It matters if you're willing to kill a kid to protect it." Evan flinched. Shadow shoved his head under the boy's hand, grounding him. Carver's smile thinned into something brittle. "Your hero complex is cute. Here's the truth. Evan's old man here, he nudged the unconscious man's boot with his own, used to be my partner. We were going to file together. Land survey, mineral rights, grandfather clause, all neat and legal. Then he hid what we found and pretended there was nothing here." Luke frowned. "People don't kidnap their partners over iron ore." Carver laughed once harsh. "You really think this is about iron? This vein runs under half the ridge. Someone's been leeching money off it for a decade, grants cleanup funds, fake remediation contracts. Cash meant for veterans' housing for rehab programs siphoned through shell companies and buried in ledgers down here. With my name on the first agreements," he jabbed his chest. And his. Luke's chest tightened. "Veterans' housing, rehab programs, Faces flashed in his mind, guys from his unit too proud or too broken to ask for help. Waiting lists months long. Doors that never opened. "You stole that money?" Luke asked. Carver's eyes burned. "I didn't steal anything. I set it up. They shut the mine and said there was no budget to fix it. Meanwhile, somebody up the chain took my idea and made it their own. Only one person knew where the paperwork was. One person signed the original rights over to the state. One person held the key." He pointed down at Evan's father. "He sold me out. Sold all of us out." The tunnel seemed to narrow around them, the air thicker, heavier. Luke looked down at the unconscious man. The man's face, under the bruises and frost, carried that beaten, weary look he'd seen in too many VA waiting rooms. Choices gone wrong. Compromises turned to chains. The goal shifted beneath Luke's feet. He wasn't just trying to get a kid and his dad out of a bad situation anymore. If what Carver was saying was true, there were records down here, proof someone had been bleeding help away from people who needed it most, including men like Luke, men like the ones he couldn't save. Evidence. The word thudded in his chest like a second heartbeat. If they walked away, if Carver burned, whatever was in that vault, no one would ever know. His mission had just flipped. Not just escape, expose. Luke exhaled slowly. "Evan's father may have made bad deals," he said. "But you crossed a line the minute you put a kid in a shed and poured gas." Carver's hand twitched toward his coat. "And I'll cross another if you don't start walking." Holt stepped forward, blocking the motion with one meaty arm. "We don't fire guns down here," he said. "You like breathing, then shut your mouth and move." The ceiling groaned again. A trickle of pebble-sized rocks pattered onto Luke's shoulder. Holt jerked his chin deeper into the tunnel. "We keep standing here arguing, we all get buried. Go." Luke weighed options rapidly. No clean way past them. No vertical exit. The shaft they'd fallen through was too high, jagged, slick with new snow. He could try to rush Carver, but a stray shot, a panic trigger, pull a ricochet. In this confined space, it would be a massacre. And there was shadow pressed against his leg. Evan barely holding it together. The unconscious man whose breath was starting to rasp more weakly. For now, survival came first. The rest he'd have to play by ear. "Fine," Luke said. "But Evan stays behind me." Carver snorted. "Kid goes where the leverage is." Shadow's growl deepened. Luke took a step closer to Carver, not aggressive, just deliberate. The kind of step that said he wasn't bluffing. "You touch him, this tunnel won't be the thing that kills you." For the first time, Carver hesitated. Shadow's teeth, Holt's warning, Luke's stance, some part of his brain still recognized a line he didn't want to cross here, not yet. "Whatever gets us to that vault faster," Holt muttered. "Move." Luke hoisted Evan's father again, feeling the man's weight like a personal indictment. Evan stayed glued to his side. Shadow slid to the boy's far flank, forming a living barrier. They started walking. The tunnel sloped downward, the floor uneven with old ties and half-rotten planks. Rusted rail tracks ran along the center, vanishing into dark. Luke's headlamp cut a narrow cone of visibility ahead, illuminating timber supports eaten by time and moisture. "What's that smell?" Evan whispered. Holt answered without turning. "Old air. Rust. Bit of gas. You smell rotten eggs," you shout. Evan swallowed audibly. "Okay." Luke kept his breathing slow, controlled, listening to the small sounds, the clack of their boots, the soft scuff of Shadow's paws, the distant drip of water. The tunnel widened in places, narrowed in others. Once they crossed a yawning black gap, an old vertical shaft on a splintered catwalk barely 2 boards wide. "Don't look down," Luke murmured. Naturally, Evan looked down. He sucked in a breath. It's forever." Shadow trotted across with more confidence than any of them, pausing halfway to glance back as if to demonstrate how simple it was. The dog's tail brushed Evan's leg on the boy's turn, a silent nudge. Halfway across the catwalk creaked ominously. "Keep moving," Holt barked, his tone clipped. "Wait in the middle, don't stop." Luke's grip tightened around Evan's father. One bad step, and they'd both drop into nothing. A memory flashed, another drop, another void, another man's scream cut short by distance and impact and dust. His misbelief clenched like a fist in his chest. If you're not in control of every move, people die. He forced his legs to keep going. They reached the far side. Only when Shadow's paws touched solid rock did Luke allow himself a breath. After what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Old machinery loomed in the dark, rusted winches, abandoned carts, a collapsed conveyor. At the far wall stood a steel door, its surface mottled with age, but intact. A heavy combination lock was set into the center. "There she is," Carver said, reverent. "Our little time capsule." Holt eyed the ceiling. "Rock's thinner here. Make it quick. Carver turned toward the unconscious man on Luke's shoulder. Time to wake the turncoat. Luke eased him down gently onto a crate. Up close, the man looked older than Luke had first guessed, grief and hard years carved into his face alongside the bruises. Evan knelt immediately, gripping his father's hand. Dad, wake up, please." The man's eyelids fluttered. His voice was a cracked whisper. "Evan, I'm here." Evan choked. The man's gaze shifted, unfocused, passing over Shadow, catching on Luke. For a heartbeat, confusion flickered there, and something else. Recognition of a different face in a different place. "Staff Sergeant," he mumbled. We lost the ridge." Luke's chest clenched. He'd heard that tone before. Battlefield ghosts bleeding into the present. A mind trying to reconcile two realities. Sir Luke said quietly, "You're in a mine. Your son is with you. You're hurt, but you're alive." The man blinked, focusing with effort. "Mine. Carver." At the sound of his name, Carver stepped closer. "Yeah, it's story time, old friend. Combination. Now. Or the kid watches you fade out right here." Evan whipped around. "Don't talk to him like that." Carver ignored him, eyes pinned on the weak man. "Tell me the numbers." The man's throat worked. Luke could see the war playing behind his eyes, fear, guilt, something like shame. "Don't," Luke said. "You don't owe him anything." Carver's patience snapped. He grabbed Evan by the collar and yanked him backward, pressing the boy against the cold steel door. Shadow exploded forward, barking teeth flashing. Carver whipped a small pistol from his coat, one Luke hadn't seen, jamming it toward the dog. "Call him off, or he dies," Carver snarled. Shadow stood his ground, growling, low eyes locked on Carver. Luke's heart slammed so hard it hurt. He was out of time, out of room, and one wrong word might cost him the only partner who'd never once walked away. He raised his hand slowly. "Wait," Luke said. "You don't want to do this." Carver's finger tightened on the trigger. Shadow took one deliberate step closer. For a heartbeat, everything in the chamber existed in a frozen tableau. Carver's hand clenched around the pistol. Shadow's lips pulled back, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Evan's eyes squeezed shut, breath hiccuping in his throat. Luke saw it all, the angles, the distances, the bad outcomes. He also knew one unshakable truth. If he rushed Carver now, Shadow would take the bullet first. He lifted both hands higher. "Shadow," Luke said quietly. "Back." The words scraped his throat. Shadow's ears flicked. For a moment, the dog didn't move, caught between instinct and trust. Then with agonizing reluctance, he stepped backward just enough that Carver's aim dipped away from his heart and toward the rock floor. "That's better," Carver said, breathless. "Everyone behaves, nobody bleeds." Evan glared at him, fury cutting through his fear. "You heard him, and you'll," what Carver snapped. "You're 12. The man on the crate, Evan's father, forced a breath past cracked lips. Don't listen to him." Carver whirled on him. "I'm done waiting, Mason. Numbers. Now." Mason's gaze drifted from Carver to Evan, then to Luke and Shadow. Shame and resolve wrestled there. He licked his lips. "If I give you the combination, you let my son walk out." Carver laughed. "Sure." "Scout's honor," Luke stepped in. "He's lying, you know that." Mason's eyes slid to Luke. There was something in them now, recognition, not of Luke, but of the type of man he was. Someone who'd seen that particular brand of careless cruelty before. Mason's voice dropped. "Maybe. But I can't let him die because of me. Not again." That last word hung heavy. Again. Luke understood more than Mason could know. That same word had lived under his own skin for years. Carver marched closer, shoving the pistol under Mason's chin. Last chance. Mason stared past the barrel, past Carver, straight at his boy. "Evan," he whispered. "Come here." Carver yanked the gun away, annoyed. "What are you? I'm not running," Mason said. "You want the numbers, you listen to them out loud." Evan hesitated, then slid off the crate, Shadow stuck to his side. Luke's muscles tensed, ready to move the second the window opened. Mason took a shallow breath. 2, 4, 6, 8. Carver leaned, closer eyes, narrowed lips, moving silently as he repeated the digits. Mason continued. 7, 1, 3. Carver stepped to the vault, shoving Evan backward against the door. He gripped the heavy combination wheel with pale knuckles, turning it with reverent intensity. "Don't try anything," he warned. "I hear one footstep that isn't mine, I shoot." Holt watched the ceiling. The occasional shower of pebbles had become more frequent. "We're on a clock," he muttered. "Rock's not happy." Carver ignored him, working the last number. A clunk echoed faintly. He exhaled almost giddy and pulled. Nothing. The door didn't budge. Carver froze. Turned the wheel again. Yanked harder. The door stayed shut. "What did you do?" he snarled, whipping around. Mason's mouth twitched in something like a ghost of a smile. "You always were bad at math," he rasped. "You wanted the front door combination." Carver strode back, grabbed him by the shirt front. "What other kind is there?" Mason coughed, a fleck of red staining his lip. "The one you can't read unless you know where to look." Luke's pulse ticked up. "Midpoint of the tunnel. Midpoint of the lie." "What do you mean?" Luke asked. Mason's gaze met his. "Ledger's no good without proof. Proof's no good without context. State thought they buried everything when they closed this shaft. But they needed someone to sign off that there was no active vein and no environmental hazard." His laugh was bitter and hoarse. "That's the lie they've been building on." Carver shook him hard. "Where is it?" Mason grimaced in pain. "Safe. Behind the safe." Luke's head snapped toward the vault. Up close, the door looked solid, seamless. But there, at the bottom left corner, a section of the rocky wall had a faint, unnatural seam. A panel. "Backup compartment," Holt said quietly, following his gaze. "Inspectors used to keep sample cores in hidden slots, so mine owners couldn't swap them." Mason nodded weakly. "They used mine. I kept copies. Enough to ruin careers. Maybe fix some lives." Carver's grip tightened. "And you hid them from me." Mason's gaze hardened. "I hid them from everyone." The idea hit Luke like cold water documentation, proving the state had lied about environmental risk, falsified reports, misappropriated funds meant for veteran support. Not just local corruption, systemic. Names, Luke asked. Mason's eyes closed briefly. Company reps. County officials. Some folks on the vets board. They signed off on ghost budgets. Money went nowhere. Or to shell outfits. I tried to blow the whistle. They made me the fall guy. Carver's voice rose brittle. "You could have gone to me. We could have taken it back together." "You went to threats," Mason whispered. "And my kid." For a second, silence pressed down on them, heavier than the rock overhead. Then the ceiling groaned loud this time. A crack zigzagged across the chamber's roof like a lightning bolt. Dust rained down, stinging their eyes. Holt swore, "We're out of time. Either grab the stash, or we all get buried with it." Carver shoved Mason back onto the crate and stalked to the hidden panel. He ran his hands along the seam, found the recessed latch, and pried it open. Inside, wrapped in oilskin like a relic, was a thick binder and a narrow metal box. Carver's breath hitched. He grabbed both like a man holding a winning lottery ticket and a gun at once. Luke stepped forward. "You burn that and the people who did this walk free. Those funds never get traced." Carver's eyes glittered. "Maybe they deserve to know how it feels to lose something they thought was theirs." "This isn't justice," Luke said. "It's revenge." Carver's lip curled. "You think there's a difference after what they did? After what they did to your men, bet some of those approvals run through the same people who cut your benefits too. You really think the system's coming to save you?" The words were a knife made of truth. Luke hated how much of it he recognized. He thought of late nights in cramped VA lobbies of men with haunted eyes shuffling forms like talismans of nurses, apologizing for wait lists they couldn't control. Of his own discharge, papers stamped and signed with promises that never materialized. His misbelief surged. If you don't take control, if you don't hold every piece yourself, people die and nothing changes. Shadow nudged his leg hard. Luke blinked. No, that wasn't the whole truth. Not anymore. He wasn't alone in this tunnel. He wasn't the only one who cared. "That evidence isn't just about you," Luke said. "It's about every life those funds were meant to help. You torch it, you're finishing their job for them." The ceiling boomed, a chunk of rock the size of a helmet smashing into the floor between them. Evan screamed. Shadow lunged, shoving the boy back. Holt flinched, gaze jumping upward. Rockfalls starting. "We've got minutes. Maybe less." Carver clutched the binder to his chest, indecision warring with rage. "Give it to me," Luke said. "You want out, I'll help you walk. You want to face a judge with something to bargain with. That binder's your ticket." Carver's eyes narrowed. "You'd really hand this to the same people who signed those forms. I'd hand it to people who still remember what their oath meant." Luke shot back. "And if that doesn't work, I'll put every page online myself. Names and all." The ground shuddered. A support beam snapped, crashing down near the tunnel entrance. They'd come through, half blocking it with a pile of debris. Holt swore again, louder this time. "We lose that passage and there's no other exit this deep." Decide Carver's gaze flicked between the blocked tunnel, the vault, the binder, and Evan's terrified face. His knuckles whitened. Then something in his expression went cold. "Fine," he snarled. "You want your justice. Go dig it out of a rock slide." Before Luke could move, Carver spun, hurling the metal box straight at the overhead crossbeam. It hit with a deafening clang. The beam cracked fully. The chamber exploded into chaos. Rock dust and timber cascaded down like a stone avalanche. Luke grabbed Evan, dragging him under the nearest machinery. Shadow dove with them, curling his body around the boy. Stones slammed into the floor where they'd been standing seconds earlier. The air went opaque with dust. Luke couldn't see Carver anymore, only the echo of his ragged coughing somewhere amid the thunder. Then silence. Not full, but enough to hear his own heart. Evan coughed, voice raw. Dad, Mason groaned faintly. "I'm here." Shadow licked the boy's cheek, whining softly. Luke forced himself out from under the rusted framework, blinking grit from his eyes. The tunnel entrance was gone, sealed by a wall of rubble. Holt staggered to his feet, blood streaking his temple. He stared at the blocked passage, face pale. "We're cut off," he said. "No back route from here. That was it." Luke scanned the chamber. Carver lay half-buried near the collapsed section, pinned at the leg by a boulder. The binder miraculously lay just out of his reach, dust-coated but intact. Carver saw it too. "You touch that," he rasped, "and I swear." The ceiling popped again, an ominous, hollow sound. Luke ignored him for the moment, turning to Holt. Ventilation. Holt wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "There's an emergency shaft, farther down. Old ladder, probably rusted to hell. If it's not caved in too, that's our way," Luke said. Holt shook his head. "Even if it's open, it comes out on the north face. That straight cliff for 40 feet. Better than suffocating," Luke replied. Evan tugged at his sleeve, eyes huge. "My dad can't climb." "I know," Luke said softly. "We'll figure it out." Behind them, Carver let out a hoarse laugh. "You won't make it 10 yards dragging dead weight." Luke turned something in him, finally snapping into diamond-hard clarity. "Maybe not alone," he said. He picked up the binder, slid it into his pack, and zipped it shut with a final decisive motion. He wasn't leaving the proof behind. He wasn't leaving anyone behind. Not this time. He slung the pack on, hoisted Mason again, and looked at Holt. "You know this mine," Luke said. "You get us to that shaft, I get us out." Holt studied him for a long beat. In the dust and dim light, there was a history in his eyes, a man who'd once believed in something before it buried him. Finally, he nodded. "All right, soldier," Holt said. "Follow me." Luke whistled softly. "Shadow with Evan. Stay tight. No one falls behind." The shepherd moved instantly, pressing against the boy's leg. They stepped into the dark tunnel leading deeper into the mountain, leaving behind the blocked passage, the groaning stone, and Carver's fading curses. The dark night hadn't broken yet, but Luke had chosen his hill. He'd die on it if he had to. He just hoped the mountain would let them live long enough to see daylight and justice on the other side. The tunnel narrowed as they moved the rock, pressing closer, the air turning thick and stale. Every breath tasted of rust and old dust. Luke felt it in his lungs, heavy, reluctant. Holt led the way, one big hand skimming the wall like a man reading Braille. His busted headlamp sat crooked on his hard hat, but he didn't need the light. He'd walked these tunnels before. "Step wide here," Holt warned. "Left side's hollow." Luke adjusted his grip on Mason, muscles burning. Evan walked at his hip, one hand gripping his father's sleeve, the other buried in Shadow's fur. The dog stayed close shoulders, brushing the boy's leg with every step. A moving anchor. "How far?" Luke asked, voice low. "Couple 100 yards," Holt said. "If the shaft's still open." And if it's not, Holt didn't answer. The ceiling popped again, a dull, ominous sound. Dust sifted down like gray snow. Shadow stopped nose-lifting, ears flattening. He let out a soft, uneasy whine. Luke's pulse jumped. "What is it, boy?" Shadow sniffed again, then moved sideways away from the center of the tunnel, pressing himself against Luke's thigh. Evan swallowed. "Why's he doing that?" Holt glanced back. His nose wrinkled. Smell that Luke inhaled. Faint, acrid. Under the rust and dust, something sharp like rotten eggs cut with metal. "Gas," Holt muttered. "Low concentration, but if pressure builds..." He tilted his head toward the overhead rock. One spark, and we're done. Luke switched off his headlamp on instinct. Darkness swallowed them. Only Holt's dim, flickering lamp remained. "No open flame," Luke said. "No metal scraping." We moved slow. Shadow whined again, then did something Luke had never seen him do. He stepped in front of Holt and blocked the way, planting himself squarely in the center of the tunnel, refusing to move. "Easy, boy," Holt grumbled. "You're in the road." Shadow growled, sharp and insistent, not at Holt, but at the tunnel ahead. Luke's skin prickled. "He doesn't want us going straight. Holt frowned. Only path is straight, shaft's dead ahead. Shadow pivoted nose, brushing the ground, then trotted 3 steps to the right where the rock looked solid. He pawed at it. Once. Twice. A hollow echo answered, just barely audible. Luke pressed his hand to the wall where Shadow scratched. The rock felt cold, but not as solid as it looked. There, under his fingertips, was the faint outline of old boards buried and painted over with mineral dust. Vent drift, Holt said slowly. They sealed some of those when the state shut this place down. Luke looked at Shadow. You smell fresher air. The dog huffed tail twitching once. Holt hesitated. Could be blocked. Could be a dead end. Could be, Luke said. But the main tunnel's a bomb. We take the drift. He shifted Mason against his shoulder and looked at Holt. Can you open it without sparks? Holt stared at the boards, thinking, then nodded once. I'll try. He slid a crowbar from his belt, wood-handled tips wrapped in old leather. No exposed steel against stone. He wedged it gently into a crack and leaned his weight into it. Wood groaned. A seam split. Cold air whispered through, sharper and less stale than what they'd been breathing. Shadow's ears perked tail, giving a short, firm wag. That's good enough for me, Luke said. Holt widened the gap just enough for them to squeeze through. Stay low, he warned. Duck your head. Watch your packs. Luke went first, half crawling, dragging Mason through the narrow passage. Rock scraped his shoulders, the pack biting into his spine. For one awful second, the tunnel pressed so close he couldn't inhale properly. He forced himself forward. The drift opened a few yards later into a slightly wider passage sloping upward. The air here was still bad, but less poisoned, less dead. Shadow popped out behind him, shook dust from his coat, and immediately moved to Evan as the boy squeezed through after Holt. You okay? Luke asked. Evan nodded, though his eyes were huge. I don't like caves. Me either, Luke said. We're not staying. Holt took point again, breathing harder now. Shaft's just off this drift if my memory's worth anything. Another distant rumble rolled through the rock. Better hope it is, Luke muttered. They found the shaft by feel before sight. The tunnel dead-ended at a circular opening in the floor ringed by rusted steel. Luke's headlamp cut across a black well that seemed to swallow the beam. Old iron rungs were bolted into the side of the shaft, running upward into darkness. There, Holt said. Emergency exit. Used to be. Luke flicked his light upward. 30, maybe 40 feet of ladder. The upper section disappeared into packed snow and ice where the shaft emerged on the north face. How stable? Luke asked. Holt grunted. Depends how you feel about 30-year-old metal. Evan peered over the edge, then immediately recoiled, stomach lurching. I can't. I don't think I can. Shadow nudged his side, then stepped forward, placing his front paws on the first rung as if demonstrating. He looked back over his shoulder at Evan, ears forward. Luke couldn't help it. He almost laughed. Show off, he murmured. To the boy he said, We'll rope you. You won't fall. What about Dad? Evan whispered. Luke stared up the shaft, mind calculating. We send you and Shadow first, he said slowly. You go light. Holt follows to stabilize the ladder and break through the snow at the top. I'll come last with your dad. Evan's head snapped toward him. You'll be under us. Exactly, Luke said. If anything gives, it hits me, not you. The boy's eyes watered. That's not fair. Luke felt something ease in his chest. Sometimes that's what being the adult means. Holt rummaged in an old supply crate near the shaft. Miraculously, he found a coil of rope stiff but usable. He tested it with a sharp tug. Seen worse, hold a truck, he said. They looped it around Evan's waist, double-knotted it under his jacket. Luke clipped the other end to his own belt. You just climb, Luke said. Don't look down. Shadow's going with you. Evan wiped his cheeks with the back of his glove. What if he falls? Shadow snorted softly, as if offended by the idea. He won't, Luke said. He's got four-wheel drive. He touched the shepherd's neck. Stay with him. No hero jumps. Shadow huffed, then turned to the ladder. Holt placed a boot on the lowest rung, testing. It creaked, but held. Kid in the middle, dog above him, Holt said. I clear the top. He climbed first, muscles bunching under his coat. The ladder groaned but stayed in place. After 5 rungs, he grunted. All right, let's move. Shadow went next. Luke held his breath as the dog maneuvered, claws scraping lightly on metal. Shadow climbed like he'd been born on scaffolding, body close to the wall, weight balanced. Evan followed, small boots, wobbling fingers, white-knuckled on the rungs. I'm right here, Luke called up. Feel the rope, that's me. I've got you. Okay, came a tremulous reply. Luke listened to the rhythm of their movement, the creak of each rung, Evan's quick breaths. Holt's muttered curses as he worked at the snowpack above. Mason groaned quietly at his feet. Almost there, Luke murmured. Stay with me. Minutes stretched. The shaft amplified every sound, the clink of metal, the rasp of gloves, the distant muffled crack of the storm still raging above. Then Holt shouted down. "Top's clear, I'm through." Cold air knifed down the shaft, fresh and biting. Evan Luke called. "I'm okay." The boy's voice came from somewhere near the top now. Shadows already up. Of course he was. Luke exhaled slowly. Time for the hard part. He wrapped Mason in the last of the emergency blanket, securing the man's arms around his own shoulders with loops of rope. The weight doubled now, man and binder and pack. Everything he'd chosen not to leave behind. He set his boot on the first rung and climbed. The ladder groaned a low, ugly sound, but stayed intact. 1 rung. 2. 10. Halfway up, his right hand slipped on a patch of ice. He caught himself, knuckles slamming into steel. Pain flared bright and sharp. Luke Evan called, voice high. "You okay?" "I'm good," Luke grunted. "Keep moving away from the shaft. Don't stand right above it." "Shadow says he's not moving," Evan shouted back. Luke could almost picture it, Shadow planted at the lip of the shaft, refusing to leave. "Figures," Luke muttered. His legs trembled, fire spreading through his thighs. Mason's weight dragged at his shoulders, wrenching old injuries in ways that made his vision spotty. He kept climbing. 2 rungs from the top, the ladder shuddered violently. "Hold," Holt bellowed. "Don't move." Something above Luke slammed into the rock, the shaft mouth narrowing as a slab of ice sheared off from the cliff face. Fragments rained down, stinging his neck. One of the rungs below him tore free with a metallic scream, leaving a gap in the ladder. Mason's weight swung them dangerously. Luke's heart spiked. If one more rung failed, Shadow Evan yelled, panic spiking his voice. Do something. Luke didn't see what happened, he only felt it. Suddenly, the rope around his waist pulled upward. Hard. The strain on his arms lessened as weight shifted. Someone was hauling from above with everything they had. Not just someone, several someones. Through the roar in his ears, he heard Holt grunting, Evan gasping, and Shadow's claws scrabbling against rock. The dog braced like a furry fulcrum body, low rope jammed across his shoulders as he pushed backward. They were all pulling, all of them. He wasn't carrying this alone. Again, Holt shouted. On 3, 1, 2, 3 they heaved. The ladder shuddered, but held just long enough for Luke to grab the shaft's rim with his free hand. Holt's fists clamped around his forearm, hauling. Evan grabbed at his sleeve. Shadow tethered in the rope, Webb dug in with a growl that sounded like defiance made flesh. Luke slid the last few inches out of the shaft, Mason's deadweight scraping over the edge. They collapsed in a heap in the snow, gasping. The wind hit his face like a slap. Open air. Sky, dark and churning, but sky. Evan rolled onto his knees, sobbing with relief. He threw his arms around Shadow's neck. You did it, he whispered into the dog's fur. You did it, you did it, you did it. Shadow just panted eyes, bright tail thumping weakly. Luke lay for a second longer chest, heaving snow melting under his back. They'd made it out of the mountain. But they weren't safe yet. The north face was exactly what Holt had promised, a steep drop, the slope falling away in a near-vertical sheet of snow and rock. Far below, treetops swayed like dark, restless hands. Cliff Luke rasped. Yeah, Holt said. Welcome to the lousy part. How do we get down? Evan asked. Holt pointed to a narrow ledge skirting the cliff edge. We follow that around. There's a gentler slope a few hundred yards east. If it hasn't avalanched, the wind gusted hard enough to make them all sway. Snow whipped sideways in blinding sheets. Luke squinted into the storm and froze. On a distant ridge, cutting briefly through the blowing white, he saw a flash of light, then another. Headlights. Snowmobiles. He almost laughed. Rangers. They saw the fire. Or the slide. Evan blinked. Can we call them radios in my cabin? Luke said. Then slowly. But we've got something better. He looked at Shadow. The shepherd met his gazed chest, still heaving fur caked with dust and snow. The dog's ears tipped forward as if he'd heard the idea taking shape in Luke's mind. You still got one more run in you, partner, Luke asked. Shadow's tail lifted. Holt frowned. You sending the dog ridge between here and my cabin runs like a shelf, Luke said, thinking aloud. Shorter for him than it would be for us, and faster. If he gets to the cabin, rangers will see him when they sweep the line. Or he can cut scent straight to them. You're betting our lives on a dog outrunning a storm, Holt said. Luke glanced at Evan. The boy's arm was still wrapped around Shadow's neck. He's done it before, Luke said. Memory flashed the night he found Shadow half dead on his porch, a survivor who had already outrun something worse. Evan swallowed. He'll come back, right? Luke's chest tightened. This is what trust feels like. Letting go of control long enough for someone else to carry the next piece. He will if he can, Luke said honestly. But if he can't, it's because he stayed with whoever needed him more. And that's who he is. Evan buried his face in Shadow's fur for a moment, then leaned back, eyes rimmed red. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. Go help them. Please." Luke unclipped the rope harness around Shadow's chest and rewove it into a makeshift collar with a long tail, tying an old strip of red cloth to the end, a flag against the white. "Fine people, Shadow," he said, gripping the dog's face gently. "Bring them back here. To us. To the ridge." Shadow's gaze locked onto his. There was no confusion there, only that same steady intelligence Luke had trusted in every bad decision that turned out to be the right one. The dog gave Evan's cheek one last lick, then turned toward the ledge. "Go," Luke said. Shadow launched into the storm, his gray and white body swallowed quickly by the blowing snow. For a few seconds, Luke could still see the flash of the red cloth flickering like a heartbeat along the ridge. Then it was gone. Evan wiped his face with a sleeve. "What do we do now?" Luke pushed himself up every joint, protesting. He adjusted his pack, checked Mason's breathing, and looked at Holt. "Now," he said quietly, "we don't waste what he's buying us." He nodded toward the ledge. "We move." The wind knifed at them as they edged along the cliff. Holt took point boots, seeking shallow holds, testing each segment of the ledge before committing weight. Evan stayed between Luke and the wall, one hand gripping a frozen root, the other still clutching his father's coat where it dragged. Mason drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering half-formed apologies to people only he could see. Should have walked away, he mumbled once. Should have said no. "You can still say yes to the right thing," Luke said. "We've got your evidence. We're getting it out." Mason's eyes fluttered weakly. "You'll give it to them. To the right them," Luke answered. The ledge narrowed around a jut of rock. Holt slid past, then reached back a thick hand. "Your turn, kid," he said. Evan hesitated. Holt softened just a fraction. "I got you." The boy took his hand. They made it around, one step at a time, one breath at a time. Luke's thighs shook from effort. His shoulders screamed from Mason's weight. But each footfall landed solid. Each small victory over the drop below was a quiet act of defiance. They were almost to the gentler slope when a voice cut through the wind behind them, ragged and furious. "You really think you can walk away with what's mine?" Luke turned. "Carver." The man had dragged himself out of the mine, somehow leg-wrapped in a makeshift splint of broken wood and belt. His coat was torn, his face streaked with grime and blood, but he still moved with a dangerous, feverish energy, and in his hand, the small pistol. He must have found it on his way out. He limped along the ledge gun, wavering. "Drop the pack," Carver shouted. "Kick it over, now." Evan's fingers tightened on his father's coat. Holt muttered. This son of a Luke lifted his hands slightly, palms outward. "Carver, listen," I said. "Drop it," Carver screamed. "You don't get to walk out of here and hand my life's work to the people who ruined it." Luke felt the old misbelief rise. If I'd had more control, more leverage, those men wouldn't have died. If he let Carver dictate this moment, someone was going over the edge. He exhaled slowly. "You really think they ruined it?" Luke asked. "Or did they just sharpen what you were already willing to do? You used veterans' pain as a bargaining chip. You used a kid as leverage. That binder doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to everyone they hurt." Carver's eyes shone wild. "You think a file is going to save them? You think a system that let this happen is going to fix it because you show up with paper?" "No," Luke said simply. "I think we might." Carver's finger twitched on the trigger. Evan's breath hitched. "Mr. Luke." Luke raised his voice sharp. "Holt now." Holt lunged sideways, slamming his shoulder into the cliff wall. The rock shuddered. A sheet of snow above them broke loose. For a split second, it seemed like the worst possible outcome, snow and ice roaring down on all of them. But Holt knew his mountain. The small slide hit directly in front of Carver, not on top of them, breaking the ledge into a jagged lip. Carver staggered arms, pinwheeling gun flying from his hand. He went over the side. Evan screamed. Instinct slammed through Luke's body. He dropped Mason, dove, and caught Carver's wrist with one hand just as the man's body swung out into open air. Pain wrenched through Luke's shoulder. His boots skidded. Holt clamped both hands on the back of Luke's jacket, anchoring him to the rock. For a moment they formed a human chain over the drop. Carver dangled breath, coming in panicked gasps. "Let go," he croaked. "You should just let go." Luke gritted his teeth. "I've done enough of that for one lifetime." His arm burned. The pack cut into his ribs. Below the drop, blurred into white. "Grab my other arm," Luke ground out. Carver hesitated. Or Luke added, "Die for a binder you never deserved." That did it. Carver swung his free arm up, fingers clawing at Luke's forearm. Holt growled with effort, hauling them both slowly back towards solid rock. Evan grabbed Luke's belt, adding his slight weight to the pull. Together with a final heaving effort, they dragged Carver back onto the ledge. He collapsed in the snow chest, heaving eyes wide with something that wasn't quite gratitude but wasn't hatred either. "Why?" he whispered. "Why didn't you just let me go?" Luke sat back, hard chest, burning vision, swimming. "Because if I walked out of here and left you in that ravine," he said, voice raw, "I'd be the man I was trying to stop, not the one I promised my guys I would be." Carver stared at him. Something cracked behind his eyes. Not fully. Not redemption. But a fracture in the story he'd been telling himself. The wind roared, and then cutting through it a new sound. Engines, close. Shadows bark, even closer. Luke turned toward the slope. Two snowmobiles crested through the storm lights, cutting arcs through the swirling white, sheriff's markings, rescue sleds, and racing ahead of them, tail flag flickering, red chest heaving with exhausted triumph. Shadow. He barreled straight for them, skidding to a stop at Luke's feet, pressing his head into Luke's chest like he was trying to merge their bones. Luke wrapped both arms around the dog's neck and let himself breathe, really breathe, for the first time since the shed. "You did it," he whispered into Shadow's fur. "You brought them." Evan laughed through his tears. "I told you he'd coming back." The aftermath unfolded in a blur of lights and shouted instructions and the controlled chaos of practiced hands. Ropes anchored, harnesses clipped. Mason strapped into a rescue sled, oxygen mask over his face. Evan wrapped in foil blankets tucked between two paramedics who spoke to him in calm, steady tones. Carver's leg splinted properly, this time wrists cuffed to the sled's sides. He didn't fight it, just stared at the snowjaw-tight, binder-shaped absence heavy between them. Holt sat on a snowmobile bumper head, bandaged by a medic with a quick, competent touch. "You're riding out with us," the woman said. "Concussion like that, you're not hiking anywhere." Holt snorted. "Did enough hiking underground." Luke stood with Sheriff Brody at the edge of the ridge, rescue teams moving efficiently around them. The sheriff's lined face was set in a thoughtful frown. "You realize what you're handing me," Brody said, tapping the binder now sealed in an evidence bag. "Yeah," Luke said. "I do. You could have walked out with this, found a reporter, made a lot of noise on your own." Luke glanced at Shadow, who sat pressed against his leg, warm and solid. "I've been carrying weight alone for a long time, Sheriff," he said. "Didn't fix much." Brody studied him for a long moment. "You trust my office to handle this clean. I trust that you still wear that star like it means something," Luke said. "And if it turns out you don't, well, I also know how to upload a PDF." Brody snorted once, almost a laugh. "Fair enough." He sobered. "You did good work tonight, Mercer. Stupid, dangerous, reckless work. But good." Luke looked down at his scraped hands, at Shadow's muzzle resting heavily on his boot. "I almost didn't go," he admitted. "When Shadow wanted out, first instinct was to keep the door shut." What changed? Luke scratched behind Shadow's ear. The dog leaned into it, eyes closing halfway. "I got tired of deciding alone," Luke said simply. Brody nodded like that made perfect sense. "Maybe it did. Ambulances will meet us down at the base," the sheriff said. "Docs think the kid's dad has a good shot thanks to you. The evidence," he patted the bag. "We'll see how many people it brings down with him." Luke watched as Evan climbed into the sled beside his father, Shadow, hopping up and curling into the boy's lap without waiting for permission. "You'll keep me in the loop?" Luke asked. Brody smiled faintly. "Something tells me you're not the type to let me forget." The snowmobiles revved, engines rumbling under them like restless animals. Luke climbed onto the back of the last one, Shadow settling neatly at his feet, pressed against his shins. As they started down the ridge, wind lashing their faces, the cabin he'd once seen as a fortress grew small behind him. It would be there when he came back, but he knew now it wasn't meant to hold him alone. By the time they reached the valley, the storm had begun to break. Stars peeked through torn clouds. The world lay quiet, stunned as if listening. At the hospital later, after statements and questions and the hum of fluorescent lights, Luke stood outside Mason's room with Evan and Holt and Sheriff Brody. Shadow lay in the doorway, half in, half out, guarding both worlds. Mason slept color already better under the monitor's soft glow. Brody folded his arms. "DA's going to have a busy few months," Holt snorted. "About time somebody else did the heavy lifting." Evan looked up at Luke. "What's going to happen to my dad? He's going to have to answer for what he did," Luke said softly. "But he's also going to get a chance to help fix what other people did with your names." Evan chewed his lip, and Carver Brody's jaw set. He'll get his day in court, with a lot less leverage than he thought. Evan nodded slowly. Shadow nudged the boy's hand until Evan scratched behind his ears. "You're staying right," Evan asked Luke. "I mean, you're not just going back up the mountain and disappearing." Luke looked through the glass at Mason, at the binder sitting on a side table, surrounded by forms and signatures, and a future that would be messy and hard and worth it. He thought of his cabin, the silence, the ghosts, and of the dog who dragged him out of that silence, one bark, one stare, one impossible journey at a time. "I'll go back up," Luke said, "but not to disappear, to rest, to think, and then, maybe, to bring some other folks up when things get hard down here." Holt arched a brow. "Like a retreat," Luke shrugged. "Call it what you want. A place where people can breathe for a while." "People we failed before," Brody gave a small nod. "Could be something good on that ridge again." Evan leaned down and wrapped his arms around Shadow's neck. "Can we visit?" Luke's answer came easier than he expected. "Anytime," he said. "You and your dad have an open invite." Shadow's tail thumped. Somewhere on the far side of the building, a pager shrilled, doors swung, life moved on. Luke stood in that quiet stretch of hallway, one hand resting on the dog who'd refused to let him stay buried in his own past, and let a new kind of weight settle onto his shoulders. Not the crushing guilt of what he'd lost. The solid, steady weight of responsibility chosen. It felt right. "Come on, partner," he said at last, tapping his thigh. Shadow rose, stretching joints, clicking lightly, and fell into step beside him. They walked the fluorescent corridor together, leaving the ICU behind, not as a man running from ghosts, but as someone who finally understood that some scars weren't evidence of failure. They were proof that he'd stayed, even when it would have been easier to let go. And the mountain waiting under a thinning veil of clouds felt less like a fortress now, and more like what it had always wanted to be, a starting point, not an ending. The mountain thawed slowly, as if reluctant to loosen winter's grip, but by early spring the ridge above Luke's cabin shimmered with meltwater trickling down the stones in thin silver lines. The air smelled of damp pine and sun-warmed bark, a gentler world than the one that had tried to bury them. Luke stood on the front porch, rolling a new support beam into place. The shaft climb had reawakened an old shoulder injury, but today the work felt lighter, somehow shared, even when done alone. A pair of blue jays argued overhead. Shadow lay sprawled across the threshold, chin resting on his paws, tail sweeping a lazy arc whenever Luke looked down at him. "You're supposed to be supervising," Luke said. Shadow flicked an ear without lifting his head. Supervision apparently could be done horizontally. The sound of tires crunching along the gravel approach made Luke straighten. A dusty sedan pulled into view, followed by a battered county truck. Evan hopped out before the engine fully stopped, Shadow bounding upright, tail thumping hard enough to vibrate the porch planks. Shadow Evan shouted, sprinting forward. The shepherd met him halfway, nearly bowling the boy over as Evan wrapped both arms around his neck. Joy radiated off both of them, loud, uncomplicated, honest. Luke descended the steps, smiling without meaning to. "Your dad doing all right?" he asked, as Evan broke away to catch his breath. "Better," Evan said, breathing hard. "He's walking more now. Says hi. Says thank you. Says stop lifting beams that are heavier than you." Luke huffed a laugh. Sounds like something he'd say. The county truck door opened, and Sheriff Brody stepped out, binder in hand. Its once grimy cover was now sealed in clear plastic, labeled and carefully tabbed. The weight of it still felt enormous, but no longer toxic. "We thought you might want an update," Brody said. Luke wiped sawdust from his hands. "Let me guess. Half the county office is lawyering up." "More like a third," Brody said. "Some folks folded fast once they saw the core samples and signatures. Federal auditors are digging through the ghost budgets now. The vet relief fund's going to be reinstated with teeth this time." Luke nodded slowly, letting the news settle. Somewhere, men he'd served with men he'd worried about in quiet hours were going to get help he'd stopped believing the world would ever deliver. "And Carver?" Luke asked. Brody shifted his weight, facing charges. "But," he asked for a meeting. "With you?" Luke's eyebrows rose. "With me. Said you pulled him back from two kinds of cliffs," Brody said. "Doesn't expect forgiveness. Just wants you to know he's not fighting the charges. He wants the evidence to stand." Luke absorbed that, unsure what to do with the strange mix of relief and ache it stirred. Before he could speak, Evan tugged at his sleeve. "You still building that retreat?" the boy asked. "For vets? And, people who need somewhere quiet." Luke looked at the half-finished support beam at the wildflowers. Sarah had helped Evan plant just before she moved to a rehabilitation lodge down the valley, close enough for weekly visits. "Yeah," Luke said. "Still building." Evan's expression brightened. "My dad says he could help when he's better, with the easy stuff. He wants to do something right this time." Luke's throat tightened. "He's welcome. Both of you are." The boy grinned. Shadow nudged his hand, insistently earning a laugh. Brody glanced around the property, the timbered ridge, the open clearing, the sense of quiet that wasn't loneliness anymore but possibility. "Place looks different," Brody said. Feels different, Luke replied. He watched Evan and Shadow chase each other in circles, the dog's bark echoing off the trees like something alive and young again. The wind carried the scent of thawed earth and pine resin, the first notes of spring rising cautiously from the forest floor. Luke let himself breathe it in, let it fill the places that had once felt hollow. "You ever think you'd end up here?" Brody asked quietly. "No," Luke said. He paused, "but I think I finally know why I did." Brody nodded, tipping his hat. "We'll be in touch, Mercer." The sheriff returned to his truck engine, rumbling to life as he drove off down the winding road. Luke stepped back onto the porch. Shadow joined him, leaning against his leg with a soft grunt. Together they watched the last of the vehicles disappear through the trees, leaving the ridge in a hush, broken only by birdsong and the distant rush of meltwater. Luke rested a hand on Shadow's head. "Guess we start fresh now," he murmured. Shadow pressed closer, warm and steady. For the first time in a long while, Luke didn't feel like he was standing guard over the ruins of the past. He felt like he was standing at the threshold of something meant to grow. A small cabin, a broad horizon, a dog who refused to let him walk backward into silence. The mountain, quiet and vast, seemed to breathe with him. And